Thank you, Speaker. I rise in favour of the motion, be it resolved that this House commit to advancing the rights of women, girls, trans, gender diverse and two-spirit people and building an inclusive province for all. I represent BC on the steering committee of the Canadian branch of the Commonwealth Women Parliamentarians, the CWP. And I'm going to talk about why it's so important to democracy that our legislature is made up of members who mirror the rich diversity of our province, to reflect on the barriers to equity-deserving groups entering politics and characteristics of the political environment that may be driving them out, and to share some of the steps we are taking in BC and in other jurisdictions to make legislatures more welcoming to those whose lived experiences may not be considered normal in this environment, who may still feel like outsiders. To quote from the executive summary of the report on gender and diversity sensitivity at the Legislative Assembly of BC, commissioned by the CWP in 2020, in the words of the author, Dr. Jeanette Ash, Canada is celebrated as one of the most diverse countries in the world, yet, although women were first elected to Canada's national and provincial legislatures approximately 100 years ago, it took until the 1980s for women's representation to hit double digits, and even longer for the first Indigenous, Black, or openly lesbian women to secure seats. Recent elections have created the most diverse legislatures, but these bodies still do not closely mirror Canada's demographic profile. As the report states, Canada's legislatures are overwhelmingly comprised of white male elites, and their working practices continue to reflect the traditions and preferences of members who have historically populated it. With women comprising 29% of members of Parliament, Canada ranks 53rd of 193 countries, placing it well below other established democracies. When taken as a whole, women hold 34% of all provincial and territorial legislative seats. So what, you may be thinking? Doesn't the world have bigger, more existential problems to solve, like the climate crisis, like the rise of fascism? I would argue that that is exactly why we should be addressing gender and diversity representation in this institution. Studies show that more diverse and inclusive parliaments tend to be more effective and legitimate institutions. Decisions reflect a more expansive set of interests, concerns, and issues. Diverse parliaments tend to be more trusted by their electorate. The politics of presence matters for reasons of justice and for legitimacy. So, Madam Speaker, the more diverse the legislative body, the more that body is likely to pass legislation that advances the rights of equity-deserving groups and to build an inclusive society for all. Counting matters. We need diversity data to track changes in who and who is not present. But as I've learned working with Dr. Ash, substantive representation also matters. Not only do we need to be asking ourselves how many women and other equity-deserving groups are present in the legislature, we need to be asking if they are proportionally represented in positions that influence outcomes. I'm proud that our Premier created a cabinet that is 50% women. So much more needs to be done to adequately assess substantive representation. Power imbalances can be invisible and subtle. That is why the CWP is embarking on a comprehensive gender sensitivity audit that asks such questions as, are women and other equity-deserving groups proportionally represented in parliamentary leadership positions? Do the standing orders, codes of conduct, and dress codes reveal evidence of organized masculinism? What are the informal norms and conventions, and do they tend to be exclusive? And are there formal supports for parents with young families? Does the legislature have a plan for supporting and protecting legislators who may be vulnerable to violence and abuse because of their identity? Speaker, that's just a small sample of the kinds of questions that go into developing a plan to ensure this environment is welcoming to everyone. To conclude, critical to committing to the advancement of the rights of women, girls, transgender, diverse, and two-spirit people, and building an inclusive province for all, as this motion urges this House to do, is a commitment to taking a hard look at how we operate here.
Thank you, member.
Democracy
if you would take
may
your
depend
seat,
on
please.
it. Thank you.